Active voice, action verbs, and Tufte principles in writing. Before watching this lecture, make sure to do the reading. Strunk and White, The Elements of Style. Part 2, read all of that. It's about 20 pages. In Part 4, I want you to read just several entries, the and/or entry, data, effect, etc., interesting, and secondly. I'd also like you to read other entries that interest you and just at some point read the whole thing. I think you'll find it useful for your writing. But for now, if you don't have a lot of time, read all of Part 2 and just several entries from Part 4. Okay, assuming you've done that, let's look again at the final paper rubric. So the writing, you can see down at the bottom, is worth 20%. And what we're going to talk about today is those 20%. And it's over here in terms of the final paper rubric. And this detailed rubric is on Learn, the writing part. I've reproduced it here. So argument and narrative flow, the first two things, those are going to be covered in a later lecture. And what I'm going to cover now is the rest of this stuff. So word usage, clarity, active verbs, precision and accuracy, word choice, and active voice. So let's get started. One way to think about the writing section is to think of it in terms of Tufte principles. It's not really just a list of rules, they're related to certain concepts. And so if we think about the Tufte principles for displaying quantitative information, one of them is the low ink to information ratio. And if we turn that upside down, you could also say that it's a high information to ink ratio. Or another way of saying that is to make your words count in writing. And so Strunk and White are fully on board with this message. So in Part 2, Rule 17, they say omit needless words. And in Part 4, Reminder 14, they talk about not using fancy words when a common word conveys exactly what you mean. And so in some ways you can think of it as saving ink, but also there won't be clutter. There won't be things that confuse or distract your reader if you omit needless words. Now let's look at a few examples. So frowny face, the definition of GDP is the income for all those who reside within the borders of a nation. That is a little pompous, okay? It's like a little much when really what you're trying to say is that GDP measures income for all residents of a country. Don't use the word nation. That's it's like putting on airs. It's just a country. And those who reside within the borders, that's a lot of words for just saying residents. So you want to try to clean up your writing by making it as clear and simple as possible. Another example is use, which is usually better than utilize. So per capita GDP is the wealth variable utilized. Better to say, I use per capita GDP to measure wealth. I use, it's shorter word, right to the point. Okay, so another way to apply Tufte to writing is to think about the Tufte principle about communicating. And so just like in a graph, you want to make it easy for your reader to see the information that you're conveying. Same thing in writing. Make it easy for your reader to follow. So from Strunk and White, we have in Part 4, Reminder 16, be clear. In Part 2, number 13, break up overly long paragraphs. That's going to help your reader follow. So I'm going to read from Strunk and White. They say, in general, remember that paragraphing calls for a good eye as well as a logical mind. Enormous blocks of print look formidable to readers, who are often reluctant to tackle them. Therefore, breaking long paragraphs in two, even if it is not necessary to do so for sense, meaning, or logical development, is often a visual help. Okay, so the whole goal is to make it so that your reader can progress through your writing. So break up overly long paragraphs. Another one that helps your reader is to use parallel sentence structure. So Strunk and White talk about that. I'm going to give you the examples. So wrong, in spring, summer, or in winter, you're sort of interspersing that in randomly. You would say in spring, summer, or winter, or you use the in every time, in spring, in summer, or in winter. So that really helps your reader follow. In part 221, stick with one tense. So you're going to be describing to your reader what you did in the past. You're probably going to use past tense for that section. That would be your data description and methods. And then when you report your findings, well, you can either you can actually do that in the present tense. We find this. Our results suggest. Just make sure that you're consistent when you are in a particular part of your paper. All right. Another general principle, which I would definitely associate with Strunk and White, is focus on engaging your reader. And I want you to think about what makes writing vibrant, what makes it alive, and what makes writing want to make you go to sleep. Okay, so part of it certainly is the content. If you're reading about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you're probably going to stay awake. That's pretty interesting stuff. And economics is dry. It's often quite dry. But that doesn't give you license to make it even worse by writing in a way that's not engaging. And so if we look at some of these Strunk and White rules, they're going to help us engage your reader, even if the topic is dense. And so in part 214, he talks about using the active voice, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. In part 215, he says use definite, specific, concrete language, and that relates to accuracy and precision. And just like you want to have the content be accurate and precise, you want to use the right word. Strunk and White also suggests that you use Anglo-Saxon over Latin words as appropriate. The Anglo-Saxon words are a little more choppy and to the point. So gut is an Anglo-Saxon word that's more Germanic, and intestine is Latin. So the ION words, the OUS words, those are all Latin. They're a little bit longer and a little more flowy. And just think about that. You might want to vary them. If it's too, if you have a lot of Latin words, you might want to stick in a few of those more German sounding ones. All right, some other things to think about to engage your reader are using action verbs. So that would avoid the is, are, has, and have. And avoid the ing form for verbs. It's just very, very distracting for your reader, that ing. And some students are just stuck with that. Okay, so let's see some examples of active voice. The best way to see why active voice is good is to compare it with passive voice. So here's frowny face saying, these data were collected by the World Bank each year. I'm asleep. The active voice is just more engaging. The World Bank collects these data every year from official sources. It says the same thing. Well, I don't know what that official sources is about, but the point is that it's the World Bank actively collecting. And that's also related to action verbs. Okay, so avoid using is and are when you can. Instead, use active verbs. So frowny face says, my paper is about the relationship between income and well-being. All right, well, that sounds kind of interesting. It's more engaging, though, to say my paper explores the relationship between income and well-being. I would rather explore something than just be told it is. Okay, and here's some suggestions for action verbs. You can explore, investigate, study, and analyze your topic. And your results might suggest, demonstrate, confirm, or support. Table 1 might show or provide descriptive statistics, and the World Bank collects and compiles. Action verbs and active voice go together. When you're using an action verb, you're going to be putting it in the active voice a lot of times. So again, the data are from the World Bank compared to the World Bank collects and compiles the data. And again, per capita GDP is the wealth variable utilized. I use per capita GDP to measure wealth. Okay, so we have use and measure instead of is, the, and a long word utilized. Okay, so those are some examples. All right, things to avoid. And, slash, or. Forget about that slash thing. Tell your reader which one it is. It's either and or it's or. If you have two words and you slash them, it's really not clear what you mean. Don't do that slash thing. Same kind of idea with etc. If you have some other things you want to add to the list, add them. Don't make your reader say, what? What else could that be? And if you don't know anything that it could be, then don't put the etc. That's kind of cruel. Okay, so Strunk and White talk about interesting. I think you can say the same thing about important. So for interesting, I'm reading from section 4 under the passage interesting. It's page 50 in the Strunk and White 4th edition. Interesting. An unconvincing word. Avoid it as a means of introduction. Instead of announcing that what you are about to tell is interesting, make it so. Same thing with important. So you're going to have to motivate your topic. Don't tell me it's important. Why should I believe you? Demonstrate. Show me why. Tell me why. Okay, another one is firstly, secondly, and thirdly. Those LYs are a complete waste of ink. Just say first, second, and third. They also sound sort of pretentious, so get rid of those. Prove, we've talked about in social science. Really, guys, we never really prove anything. The evidence might suggest, even in hard sciences, you have a weight of evidence that suggests. It's very hard. The prove is an overstatement. Utilize, that's a fancy word. Just use. Use. All right, a few things on correct usage. Data are plural. A data set is singular. We use the word data a lot. Use it correctly. Effect is a noun. Affect is a verb. So X affects Y, and X has a big effect. That's a common mistake. If you can remember which is which, it will make your writing better. All right, so, oh wait, I think I had, let me see if I can go back. Oh, my link isn't working. Okay. All right, so I want to go back to the it's like seeing everything in reverse, this one, the writing category. Okay, so word usage. Let's look at what would give you full credit for word usage. So when you use data, use them as a plural. Use a plural verb to go with data, so data are. No one study can prove anything, so don't use the word prove, and don't use the word important. Just explain why it's important without using that word. All right, we talked about clarity. It just has to be clear. Active voice uses many active verbs, very few instances of to be and to have. You can't eliminate them completely. Sometimes you have to be or to have, but try when you can to use an active verb. Use precise and accurate use of language. That's straightforward. Word choice. All words clearly convey information. An acceptable but a B or a C acceptable is some unnecessary words, and poor is lots of unnecessary words. So you really want to be looking out for that. And then using the active voice. You want to mostly use the active voice. And that's that.